Billions of dollars of criminal cash are washed through international cities every year. But now there's a new breed of money launderers called kleptocrats. They are political elites who steal public funds and loot state assets. The billions they launder across the globe can bring countries to the brink of collapse. In what could be one of the world's biggest bank robberies, two oligarchs, Ihor Kolomoisky and Hennedy Boholubov, stand accused of laundering $5.5 billion from Ukraine's biggest bank, Privatbank, which they founded. Valeria Gontareva was one of the people who uncovered the alleged fraud at Privatbank, which had over 20 million customers.
It's my house on fire.
Wow. God, that's a huge fire.
Yeah. It was absolutely devastated. It was just awful for all my family. All my photos, all my mothers and fathers' photos, everything. They burned my life. My contract with Central Bank was for 7 years, but I left Central Bank after 3 years because of death threats. And you can see even photos of these death threats. It was the coffins with my money can. Absolutely sure that right now it's a revenge of one particular oligarch, Kolomoisky. Deputy head of presidential administration called me and he introduced me Kolomoisky. And Kolomoisky said, and Valeria, I observed that you were without any security guards. Do you know that to kill a person in Ukraine costs just $10,000?
Kolomoisky is one of Ukraine's richest and most powerful men. The former political governor of Ukraine's main industrial region, he owns airlines, factories, oil companies, and TV stations. The crown jewel in his empire was Privatbank, which he co-owned with Hennedy Boholubov. What was your involvement with Privatbank?
When I was nominated the governor of the central bank in 2014, we immediately started to do stress test analysis of Ukrainian banking system. The result of this stress test of Privatbank was $5.5 billion capital hole in Privatbank. And I still believe that it's the biggest financial fraud in the world.
$5.5 billion disappeared. It's alleged that Kolomoisky and his associates siphoned it off into the accounts they controlled.
It was oligarch universe. It was the oligarch, we call it oligarch banking.
Where did all these billions go?
It's US, in Israel, in Switzerland, in Cyprus. The biggest problem was that Privatbank, it was too big to fail. With 20 million customers, when you have 600,000 of small and medium-sized companies there, when you have more than 3 million pensioners there, you know, you could not interrupt and stop this business even for a few days.
Доброго ранку, шановні колеги. Інформуємо вас, що вчора Національний банк України відніс Приватбанк до категорії неплатоспроможних, який зробить перехід Приватбанку до державної власності максимально безболісним.
Almost half of Ukraine's population had savings in Privatbank. To stop them losing their money, the state bailed it out with over $5 billion of taxpayers' money and took over the bank. Kolomoisky told us regarding the so-called laundering of $5.5 billion, he and his associates categorically deny that funds were siphoned out of the bank or that the bank suffered any loss at all. He said it was a successful business capable of making profit. He claims the real reason for nationalization was not to protect customers, but was a pre-arranged goal, and they wanted to persecute shareholders. Valeria made many powerful enemies after closing down dozens of failing Ukrainian banks, but claims putting Privatbank under state control left her a marked woman.
Even when I joined LSE and start to work in London, they continue all this campaign against me. Kolomoisky's threats became absolutely incredible. First of all, it was a car accident. Police could not find anything suspicious in this car accident. And he even promised to kidnap me from London.
Kolomoisky denies he has ever made any threats to Valeria and says she does not give any evidence at all of my supposed involvement in her misfortunes, be it a burnt car or a house.
Скажите, пожалуйста, вы видели, читали заявление Гонтаревой, которое она сейчас делает, говорит, что против нее там политическое преследование и так далее.
И машина ее сбила. И Коломойский сидел за рулем.
Нет, она такого не говорила.
Смотрите, когда был разговор, помните, она говорила, что я ей что-то там угрожал, самолет прислал. Так вот я хочу уточнить, что я обещал прислать самолет, а не автомобиль.
Kolomoisky told us, whilst I admit that some of my statements about Valeria might be considered somewhat harsh, she, following orders, cynically and unlawfully seized a very valuable asset, the bank, from me.
Ukraine, after the fall of the communism, should have been a great success story because it was a country with lots of resources. But instead, it's one of the worst stories, right, in Eastern Europe, in big, big trouble. And this is because of the people like Mr. Kolomoisky. In Ukraine, the raiding of corporations, of industrial assets, was a sport. And Mr. Kolomoisky was one of the people who enjoyed these sports. So he took over mines, he took over other assets. He's used his own private security to enforce his will on other businessmen, on people, on the state. So Privatbank shows their big thinking, shows how they're able to capture a state and be so influential. We're talking about, a huge hole in the Ukrainian financial system, in the Ukrainian budget.
The state-run Privatbank have spent years trying to find the missing money and claim billions were moved from Ukraine to a branch of Privatbank in Cyprus. The money was then laundered across the globe through hundreds of shell companies, mainly registered in notorious tax havens like the British Virgin Islands, Panama, and Delaware. They claim shell companies, controlled by Kolomoisky and his associates, began buying up corporations in America's industrial heartlands as early as 2008.
The mill's been a large part of everyone's lives. It was a major employer back in the day. Steel industry was booming then.
The workers claim Kolomoisky and his associates had little intention of seeing the mill thrive, as they quickly cut investment and costs.
Some of the employees at that point were talking that there was no maintenance being done, that the mill on the inside was slowly falling apart. They were taking every penny they could get and moving it out.
Neglect repairs on things. They had an explosion out here. 5 guys got hurt. 3 of them were serious. And thank God nobody got killed in there.
A U.S. lawsuit by the state-run Privatbank alleges Kolomoisky and his associates fraudulently obtained a $66 million loan on Warren Steel and siphoned off millions into other companies they controlled.
When these places close and they leave, we became economically depressed here. We lost the steel industry pretty much in a day. It played a big role here, and it meant a lot to this town.
Kolomoisky and his associates abandoned the mill in 2016.
I was a steel worker for 30 years, probably 28 of them here. My oldest son was a steel worker here. It was in our heritage, man. This is a steel valley. People call it the Rust Belt. That's not good. You know, that's not something to be famous for.
Kolomoisky told us he denies Privet Bank claims that the loans were fraudulent and said, "All the loans have been repaid as far as I know." He said he was not personally involved in the activities of Warren Steel, but the managers told him it was closed largely due to the very high cost of electricity, which made the products uncompetitive and the mill unprofitable. Privet Bank lawyers claim Warren Steel was a small cog in an alleged fraudulent loan scheme that started in Ukraine and stretches across America. Kolomoisky and his associates bought skyscrapers, steel companies, and real estate in Michigan, West Virginia, New York, Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, Texas, and Ohio.
I broke the story in Cleveland about Kolomoisky. It's this massive money laundering scheme whereby they laundered hundreds of millions of dollars, allegedly, in fraudulent loans and used that money to invest in real estate across the United States. And the bulk of their acquisitions, at least at the start, were in Cleveland, Ohio. Kind of a con Cleveland, con the United States. These crimes, no one bothers to look at. I mean, these real estate transactions happen in broad daylight, except they're so secretive by their very nature and complicated that people don't really know what's under the hood. This is the first building that Ihor Kolomoisky purchased in Cleveland. It's One Cleveland Center. It's 33 stories tall, the 5th tallest skyscraper in Cleveland. Purchased in 2008 for about $86 million. The ACOM Penton Media Building, they bought it for $46.5 million. In 2010, it was 90% occupied, almost completely full. They didn't try to retain their tenants, seek out new tenants, and they didn't do the basic maintenance and upkeep that made tenants want to stay. Sort of indicates that they didn't put any investment into it. And then when they sold it in 2018 for $38 million, it was down to 57% occupancy.
The Privet Bank lawsuit alleges Kolomoisky and his associates fraudulently obtained multiple million-dollar loans in Cleveland. New loans repaid old loans, and from 5 buildings alone, $67 million was siphoned off into accounts they controlled.
So to my right here is the Huntington Building. Bought it for $18.5 million, and then promptly did nothing with it. Bought 5 buildings in Cleveland. That made them the largest holders of commercial real estate in Cleveland. Unthinkable. And no one had any idea who these guys were. This all happened under the radar.
Acting on evidence from the Ukrainian authorities, agents from the FBI kleptocracy team took action in 2020.
And right now, FBI agents are raiding offices in several high-rise buildings in Cleveland.
All right, so we also just got word that there is a raid happening right now in downtown Miami that might be connected to this one at One Center here in Cleveland.
Everyone who's ready to invest some money in a struggling community is seen as a savior. And the kleptocrats are never saviors, because for them, everything is a game. It's just a game of money, it's a game of power, it's a game of moving money from one population that they rob to another population that they will rob in the future.
Kolomoisky told us he and the other defendants categorically deny that the loans were obtained by criminal means. He said he's never been convicted of a crime, and at this stage, proceedings are ongoing. To get the inside track on Kolomoisky's dealings in America, I've contacted his former business partner. Vadim Shulman, a multi-millionaire Ukrainian steel tycoon, lives in a Malibu mansion. He was a co-owner of Warren Steel with Kolomoisky and his associates, but claims they cut him out from the day-to-day running of the business. You were the first person to make allegations of wrongdoing at Warren Steel. Can you tell me how that happened?
И тогда я начал подавать в суд. И тогда, когда я получил документы судов, я увидел, что это он все отмывал, деньги, кредиты были Приватбанка. И продавали с убытком готовую продукцию Warren Steel на другой Коломойского завод. А Warren Steel брал деньги кредитные в Приватбанк.
When you found out about the private bank allegations against Kolomoisky, that he'd used it as his base for money laundering, how did you react?
Я знал, что он деньги отмывал еще где-то с 2004-2005 он уже начал отмывать деньги. Он много лет эти деньги вынимал. Я же знал не только Коломойского, я знал все правление Приватбанка. Он давно это отмывал, это все знали.
What was he like to work with directly?
Мы много путешествовали по всему миру. Но когда начали появляться большие деньги, и начала появляться власть, вместо семьянином он стал черствым бизнесменом. И бизнес, он не может бизнес, он весь бизнес строил на монополии, любой бизнес. Он везде, где берется, он разрушается. Он разрушитель, он не созидатель.
Vadim knew Kolomoisky for over 15 years. He's been trying to sue him for the $30 million he claims he lost from Warren Steel. Even though your families were close, you say that Kolomoisky defrauded you.
Честно, я даже сейчас удивляюсь, как он меня мог обмануть. И дети выросли, дети друзьями были. Для меня это было потрясение. У меня вопрос невозврата, даже вопрос, для меня главный вопрос не денег, а вопрос справедливости. Я не получу деньги, но он сядет за свое содеянное куда положено, в тюрьму.
Kolomoisky told us, Shulman has been unsuccessfully suing me and my business partners around the world for several years. Each time he lost. It is difficult to expect a person who has spent years pursuing me to offer an objective opinion. In Ukraine, Kolomoisky and his associates are using the courts to challenge the nationalization of Privatbank. In 2019, a Kiev court ruled in their favor, but the head of the Kiev court, Pavlo Voik, has recently been charged with corruption in an unrelated case.
Ми можемо переконатися, що ніякої судової влади немає, а очолює цю ієрархію суддів кримінальний синдикат. Це свідчить.
The Supreme Court has criticized judicial corruption, and protesters are demanding Voik's dismissal. Daria Kaleniuk is one of Ukraine's leading anti-corruption activists.
The justice system in Ukraine is not independent. It's very easy to buy a judge.
This court is just the swamp of corruption.
Judge Voik denies the allegations, and a counter-demonstration has turned up to support him. Sitnik is the head of the State Anti-Corruption Bureau that brought charges against Judge Voik.
Вот мы пришли против коррупционера Вовка. Знаете, кто такой? Судья Вовк.
Я не знаю и знать не хочу. Мы пришли, но я не обязана знать его.
Я поняла. Спасибо вам большое.
Daria tells us she's witnessed this type of counter-protest before.
Oligarch Kolomoisky is usually using these techniques and tactics. He's simply paying through his middleman, poor people to collect the crowd. Last winter, there were hundreds of paid protesters demanding resignation of the leadership of the National Bank of Ukraine. These paid protesters were coming from the factories controlled by Oligarch Kolomoisky. And Oligarch Kolomoisky used these protesters in order to pressure the leadership of the National Bank of Ukraine, which nationalized Privatbank. So it's just the usual tactic.
Kolomoisky has publicly denied paying protesters.
Most of the people are upstairs. Let's go.
Okay. Daria works alongside the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, known as NABU.
Yeah, and there is my office.
How successful has Kolomoisky been in fighting for his interests in protecting his wealth?
He uses various tools in order to attack NABU and in order to attack other institutions which investigate him and which took over the private bank case. NABU has official cooperation with FBI. He has lots of assets in the United States. Some of these assets were frozen already. So it's already damaging to Igor Kolomoisky. Therefore, his goal is to block NABU. He wants to dismiss the current NABU director. He wants to ensure that the new director is fully controllable man or woman. So his attention now, those institutions we have built and reformed, he wants to destroy them to get his money, private money laundering bank back.
Reining in the power of Ukraine's oligarchs was a campaign promise of President Zelensky, who was elected in 2019. Do you have any faith that President Zelensky will be able to clamp down on stuff like that happening in politics?
It is a year and a half of him being president. He should have used that time to understand how the state works. So either President Zelensky is blind or he is not committed to rule of law and anti-corruption reforms in Ukraine.
Before his election, Zelensky was a leading TV star in Kolomoisky's vast media empire. When the government nationalized Privatbank in 2016 and began worldwide investigations, Kolomoisky needed a new political ally. He found one close to home.
Посмотрите, я иду в президенты не для того, чтобы возвращать Приватбанк. Это очень странная была бы у меня цель, конечно.
I'm standing in front of 1+1, the powerful and influential Ukrainian TV network, one that's also owned by Igor Kolomoisky. Being a successful oligarch isn't just about owning mines or banks. It's also about controlling your public image. And that's what Kolomoisky has done with 1+1. He used the TV network to back Zelensky for president. In fact, the day before the first round of presidential voting, 1+1 ran back-to-back shows featuring Zelensky. Kolomoisky seemed so happy with Zelensky's election that he actually flew back to Ukraine just after the victory was announced. And most tellingly, Zelensky has fought off accusations that he's Kolomoisky's stooge ever since. Before 2019, Zelensky was an actor in a popular TV drama on one of Kolomoisky's TV channels. He played the role of Ukraine's president.
Простите, господа, придется забыть про Мальдивы и Доны Периньоны. Общество поменялось, и оно больше не будет ждать и прощать.
His character promised to stamp out corruption by any means. Fiction became a less dramatic reality in 2019. Zelensky even adapted the name of the TV show, Servant of the People, as his own party's name. Kolomoisky's lawyer became Zelensky's chief of staff.
Если он найдет нужным меня что-то спросить, я, конечно же, ему могу дать советы или там.
You look at the parliaments all over Eastern European countries, and you see these people who have no connection to politics whatsoever, from comedians to actors who got promoted by the interests behind them, by kleptocrats. Now, Zelensky, of course, has his own thinking, and at some point he might escape the gravity of Kolomoisky, but it's going to be very, very, very hard.
Zelensky has said he is not a toy in Kolomoisky's hands, but he still hasn't been able to fulfill his election promise to root out corruption in the judicial system. To understand how Kolomoisky became so powerful in politics, you have to go back to 2014. Russia invaded Ukraine's Crimea region, and pro-Russian separatists tried to seize the region of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Kolomoisky was the region's governor at the time. He spent $10 million of his own money creating a private militia called the Dnipro 1 Battalion, and offered a bounty for the capture of Russian collaborators.
I'm going to meet Yuri Bereza, the former commander of Dnipro 1, to find out what Kolomoisky is like, not just as an oligarch, but as a military and political figure. I've heard so much about Kolomoisky from his critics, and now I want to see it from the perspective of someone who was part of his inner circle.
Ну, от земля ця практично вся моя.
Kolomoisky at the time was the regional governor, and he was also funding the battalion. How did that work?
Я не знаю, чому, ну він на той момент віддався повністю захисту області. Держава тоді дала тільки зброю. Все інше дав Кологойський. Точніше, він зорганізував так, щоб це надійшло в батальйони. Засоби зв'язку, засоби захисту, харчування – це все практично взяв на себе Кологойський. Конкретно займався цим і день, і ніч.
Kolomoisky used his TV channels to highlight the threat that pro-Russian separatists posed to Ukraine and the West.
Насправді, перві місяці ми якраз виграли інформаційну війну проти сепаратистів. Не зброю в руках, а якраз завдяки журналістам, завдяки телебаченню ми змогли зупинити, а іноді десь випередити, зіграти на випередки Російської Федерації. Це важливо.
What would have happened to Dnipro if Kolomoisky hadn't offered that support?
І питання без фінансової допомоги, насправді, Коломойського, мабуть, ми б не змогли. Я хочу говорити про правду. У Коломойського є там сильні речі, які він зробив, є погані речі, які він зробив. Це абсолютно, це людина. На той момент без Коломойського, мабуть, нічого б не вийшло. От Коломойський за свої вчинки в 2014 році мав би стати там в пантеон українських героїв, там.
Kolomoisky saw opportunity when Russia was invading Ukraine. He suddenly played it all, on TV. He played it everywhere, and he said, "I'm the savior of Ukraine." Well, it's like he was looting Ukraine for so many years. He was making Ukrainians poor, but now, at least, he gave something back. And he's defending the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainian public bought it because they had no choice. They didn't want the Russians to invade, and they suddenly had Mr. Kolomoisky stopping the Russians. I don't think he's a national savior. It's like, you'd say, I'm gonna stab you, hundreds of times, and then I'm gonna call a doctor to see if something can be done about you. It's really what Mr. Kolomoisky has done, in my opinion.
I've come to the heart of Kolomoisky's power, his hometown, Dnipro.
Oh, I think I can see the Menorah Hotel. It's probably the brightest thing in the entire city. Yeah, Kolomoisky just called up a builder and said, build me a hotel in the shape of a giant menorah, and they did it.
I've decided to check into his $70 million Menorah Hotel. The presence of Western journalists in Kolomoisky's kingdom seems to have made his hotel staff suspicious.
We're good? Great, thanks. Thanks very much, thank you.
What was that about? They literally just came in and just fiddled with the lock.
while we were still in the room and then just left. Welcome to the Menorah Hotel. I thought I'd head out into the center of the city and ask a few people, locals, what they make of their infamous oligarch. What do you think of an oligarch like Ihor Kolomoisky?
Коломойский, как и все олигархи, он думает только о себе, и мы, украинцы, ему нахрен не нужны, извините за выражение.
What do you think of an oligarch like Ihor Kolomoisky?
Ну, к нему я хорошо отношусь. Ну, у меня такое с детства, мне нравится его позиция и его амбициозность. Ну, как человек амбициозный очень, это считается для меня как примером, честно говоря.
Я лично люблю футбол и занимаюсь им. ФК Днепр был очень силен в свои годы, но после ухода Коломойского команда начала разваливаться, пропали все игроки хорошие, поэтому я очень хорошо отношусь к Коломойскому.
Have you guys heard about, Ihor Kolomoisky being accused of stealing money from Privatbank? What do you think about that?
Нет, об этом я не слышал. Меня больше, честно говоря, меня не интересуют более финансовые вопросы и так далее олигархов. Если они делают что-то для города или для области или для страны, и если оно, так грубо говоря, окупается, то, на это закрываю.
I just thought it was interesting that they really highlighted the football club that Kolomoisky supports as an example of something that they really rate him for, which when you think about it, if you support a local community initiative or project like a football club, that's exactly what it does. It's a form of laundering. It's just reputation laundering. Tens of thousands in this region depend on Kolomoisky and his associates for jobs. They own some of the biggest businesses here. The workers of Kryvyi Rih iron ore mine are on strike. They tell us their wages have been cut and working conditions have become dangerous. Kolomoisky sold his share in the mine in December 2019, but a senior trade union leader has publicly claimed the mine's management still report to Kolomoisky. What do you think of the owners of the mine, people like Kolomoisky?
Редкостные твари, которые за людей никого не считают. Вот так я могу сказать. Люди находятся уже больше 25 суток под землей, они не соизволят приехать, они не хотят услышать нас, они не хотят обратить на нас никакое внимание. То есть они таким образом показывают, что мы для них никто. Ты выходишь на работу, свою смену, ты знаешь, что ты должен делать наряд, да? А тебе говорят, друг мой, извини, у тебя нету материала, нету оборудования, ты сегодня выходной, потом в субботу отработаешь. Это, конечно, до такой степени закипело, что просто до безобразия. И с января месяца началось у нас ухудшаться, упала заработная плата по сегодняшний день практически в 2 раза. Это нас уже до такой степени взбесило, мы не хотим быть, как сейчас говорится, рабами, мы хотим...
Field TV crews come here, and someone appears to be paying close attention to our every move.
Hang on, Misha. Just come here and sit.
So we've clocked someone who is definitely filming us. He's the guy in the navy blue bomber jacket, sort of standing directly behind me, probably his eyes piercing into my back. How close are they?
About 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, there he goes. We tried to find out who this man is.
Ihor Kolomoisky, український...
A search of a 2019 Ukrainian TV program reveals he bears a striking resemblance to a bodyguard who has worked for Kolomoisky and President Zelensky.
Там несколько ребят-охоронцев, они работают в охранной компании. Я не нахожусь 1,5 года в стране, им надо работать. Вот эти охранники попали здесь, они очень высокопрофессиональные, хорошие охранники. Но, естественно, что когда такой человек, как Зеленский, обратился за охраной, ему дали самых лучших. То есть получается, что у меня были лучшие охранники, которые работают в этой фирме.
The families of the striking miners claim they've been put under surveillance. Valeria's husband has been protesting down the mine, and she hasn't seen him for 25 days.
Ждем ответа о повышении заработной платы. До сих пор мы не получили ответа на наши требования. Единственное, что мы слышим от администрации шахты и комбината, угрозы и запугивания.
The mine's management claim the strike is illegal and say they tried to engage with the miners and offer pay rises. The miners deny there has been any real-term increase to their wages. Valeria alleges she's being intimidated by the mine's management to force her husband into submission.
Буквально на 4-е сутки начались звонки мне. Как жене мне начали угрожать, мне звонили. У меня ребенок шел в школу, выходя со двора, к ним подошел какой-то мужчина, пытался с ними поговорить, хватал за руки. После этого я написала заяву в полицию. Это я уже узнала позже. Мой сосед, который живет напротив нас, сказал мне, что какие-то люди днем ходили и очень внимательно рассматривали наш двор, вплоть до того, что заглядывали через забор, высматривали, что мне продолжали звонить после этого. У нас на улице стояла машина, которая за нами ездила и следила. Ну, как бы, было очень страшно.
With no wages coming in, Valeria is struggling to cope.
Отражается это таким образом, что наша семья живет, грубо говоря, от зарплаты до зарплаты, от кредита до кредита. То есть сейчас мы выживаем за счет других шахтеров, которые вот на поверхности, они нас поддержали, они нам помогли немножко финансово. Руководство могло это все изменить, но они не захотели ничего делать.
If you could speak to the owners to convince them how bad things were, what would you say?
Сомневаюсь, что с ними можно разговаривать. Это не те люди, которые выйдут и будут с нами говорить. Но хотелось бы, обратиться к их совести. Все, что я бы хотела. Все.
The mine's management deny being involved in any intimidation and say they will fully investigate the matter. Kolomoisky told us that he has not been a beneficial owner of the mine for several years. He said that the issues of the mine's management, including wages and safety, are dealt with by hundreds of professionals. I do not deal with these issues. In America, the U.S. Justice Department alleged Kolomoisky and Boholubov embezzled billions of dollars of fraudulent loans from 2008 through 2016. In London, the High Court has frozen $2.5 billion of their worldwide assets. In Ukraine, Kolomoisky and his associates are free men. They categorically deny any unlawful actions and have launched counter-lawsuits across the globe. Oligarchs have had the run of Ukraine for decades. In 2014, the people of Ukraine rose up to bring an end to corruption. Hundreds were killed in the battle to oust President Yanukovych. He had amassed a $350 million fortune by siphoning off state assets. His private mansion was turned into a museum and was meant to signify a new start.
It's really a symbol and a monument to the corruption in Ukraine that goes to the very heart of politics, corruption and kleptocracy that continues today. How much is this chandelier?
Люстра ця зайшла по документам за 13 тисяч євро.
So he got massages and spa treatments.
Масаж по баді, oxygen bathroom. Майкл Джексон мав цілі кисневі кімнати.
But since 2014, the inequality of wealth has only got worse in Ukraine.
Oh my God. It's huge.
10 oligarchs, including Kolomoisky, now control 80% of the country's wealth.
Це в нас чоловіча спальня.
Wow. How much do you think this room just by itself cost?
Ну, 3-4 мільйона. От і чим ми відрізняємося від них. Вони залежні якимись об'єктами, коштами, ще чимось. В бумажках, ну то бумага мелоч, а кімната, ну, щось є.
Under pressure from the IMF, Zelensky's parliament finally passed the so-called anti-Kolomoisky banking law in May 2020. This law stops Ukraine's oligarchs from regaining control of failed banks.
The IMF signed off on a $5 billion financial aid package to help boost Ukraine's economy, but it came with several strings attached, including a government crackdown on corruption. If Zelensky doesn't do enough to root out corruption in Ukraine, the country could be losing out on billions of dollars worth of support.
1 month later, Kolomoisky said Ukraine should turn their back on the West and the IMF and build bridges with Russia.
Now he's playing the other side, and he's saying, no, actually we need to have a really good relationship with Russia, and we can get money from Russia, and they're ready to give us many billions, to save the Ukrainian economy, and we don't need the West. Why is that? Because the West is investigating Mr. Kolomoisky right now. What enabled all this to go on for a very, very long time is the fact that the banks that were in the middle of these transactions did not care. This is a crime system that, if not dismantled, if not stopped, it will completely destroy countries. Many countries like Ukraine are already on the verge of collapse.
Kolomoisky told us he has never been convicted of any criminal offense, and he categorically denies any unlawful actions of money laundering, fraud, or kleptocracy. We contacted Mr. Boholubov, and he failed to reply. In March 2021, the US State Department accused Kolomoisky of involvement in significant corruption, placing him and his immediate family on a sanctions list which bars them from entering the US.